Hello students, welcome to one more problem on System Verilog interview series. So let's try to understand this problem statement. So in this problem, we need to find duplicate elements in an array. So if we read the problem description, then here we are given an array of integers. Write a System Verilog module that identifies all duplicate elements in an array. The module should scan the input array and return the duplicate values without printing or using any inbuilt unique or sort functions. So what does the problem mean is, let's say you are given this array with these elements like 5, 2, 7, 5, 9, 2, 10. This is the input of an array. Then the expected output should be 5 and 2. The reason it should be 5 and 2 is because you need to find the duplicate elements of an array. So here if you see the 5 is repeated 2 times, so which means 5 is duplicated. So our in the output 5 should be there, and 2 is also duplicated in the second and last second position. So in the output 2 should also be there. Similarly, if we take one more example, let's say if you have 4 sevens in this, or let's say 3 sevens in this, then the output should only be 1 7, not 2 or 3 sevens. So this is the problem statement. And if you see on the right hand side, we had already given a function in which the input argument is array, and this is the output argument, which is the output in duplicate. So this input array, this array would already be passing this value. Different test cases, not just limited to this. Our problem of this question, what we need to focus is we just need to make sure that the value of this duplicate variable gets updated properly. So let's try to solve this question. So we are given a dynamic array. By the way, this sign represents that we are given dynamic array, and input and output array both are dynamic. So we need to update the value of dynamic arrays like in the output. So here what we can do is, let's say you do for each. First we need to iterate through all the elements of an array, right? Then only we can think of performing some operation. Now what we need to do is, see, first thing is we need to, let's say this is the description of the problem, and here we are just, let's say this is an array. So what we can do is first we will iterate through each and every element. Let's say first you pick this element 5, and then you compare this value of 5 with the remaining elements of an array. You compare 5 with 2, you compare 5 with 7, you compare 5 with 5, which means if the comparison passes, which means that when I say the comparison passes, I mean 5 is equals to 5, which means you can find 5 in the rest of the array. Then in that case, you just need to fetch that number and you just need to store that number. And at the end of the iteration, we will be storing, like we will be copying that numbers to this duplicate array as well. So first thing is, once we need to identify which elements of an array are unique. So let's first what you can do is, uh, all right. So here we already we need to use two for each loops. The reason we need to use two for each loop is because you need to compare this 5 with the remaining elements of an array. So for the outer for each loop is for picking the different elements. The inner for each loop is actually comparing this element with the rest of them. So I will just name it J to avoid confusion. So here, let's say you now inside this loop. So what you can do is you just need to simply compare if I, what you need to say is if, see if I of array of I is equals to array of j. What does that mean is we are comparing 5 with itself. So we should not compare 5 with itself. Instead, we should write one more condition here that your value of j should always be greater than I. What does this mean is, see, what we need to do here is you need to come, let's say first you need to compare the value of 5 with the remaining elements. Similarly, for 2, you need to compare the value of 2 with the right hand side element and not the left hand side. Similarly, for all the elements, you will compare it with the right hand side because left hand side we are already did. When you compare, well, let's say when you compare 5 with 7, so you don't need to again compare 7 with 5. You just need to skip that. So similarly, here we need to write one more condition that if j is greater than equals to I. So let's assume initially I would be 0 and j would also be 0. So in that case, this 5 would be getting picked. But we don't want to compare 5 with 5. We need to compare 5 with 2, which means the value of j should be 1. So initially, if you see here, the I would be 0, then j should be 0, right? And so you need to skip this entry. You need to eventually pick when j is 1 for I equals to 0. So this condition would eventually be satisfied when j is 1 and I is 0, and it would finally end, and it would, we are also checking if both arrays are similar in this case, because j value would be 1, and if you say array of j and array of I same, then in that case what you need to do is, let's we can what you can we can do is we can just take some temporary variable. You can just name it anything what you want. Here we are naming it temp. So you can just update the value of temp as well with the value that we just found. So here eventually we are updating the value of temp, which is temp dot pushback, right? So and here we need to make sure one more thing. What let see here there are two scenarios given to us. If let's say if you have multiple 7, then it should only pick one 7, not in the output it should not be like many 7s printed. So you need to make sure that even if there are like more than one same entry in the input array, the output array should exactly contain one entry of that repeated element. So here, what we can do for that is, all right, if you see here, okay, so let's try to keep initially this problem more simpler. You can also just define some count variable as well. What we can do is you can increment the value of count variable here. So basically on every match, that is, let's say 5 is compared with this 5, which means you have now the count would eventually be get incremented, and eventually the value of temp would be getting updated. So basically now the count value would store, I can just write here in comment, used to store the num number of duplicate elements. So your count variable will give you the number of duplicate elements, and if you see here, and if you think for this scenario, let's say, let's try to validate our piece of logic with this scenario. Let's say first it would be 7, then it will be comparing with 7 with the right hand side element, which would the condition would be satisfied. It would be going inside. Okay, so here you need to make sure that, see here, if you see this case, right? Let's say if the input array is this, I think this you can consider this input array as 7, comma 7. Here one comma is missed, so you can assume that. So let's say if you have four sevens, then the first 7 would be compared with this 7, and it would eventually be a duplicate element. Then again, this 7 would again be compared with this, which is even a duplicate element. So you need to make sure in the output that your output should not contain multiple same repeated elements. So you can write one more condition here, that your whatever, let's say if your array of I, let's say if it is inside the variable named temp, if your value array of I is equals to s inside the variable temp, then you just need to uh, need to make sure that it should not be. So array once, let's say, okay, let's take some example. Let's say initially the array of I would be 7, the temp would also be 7. Later, the array of I is still 7, the temp is still storing the previous value. So here we need to make sure that it should not go inside this loop multiple times. Then you can also think of some another logic, like first you create the element and you can just remove the duplicate element later as well. So here we're incrementing the value of count, and now you just need to assign the value of temp variable temp of I to the value of duplicate. So basically here we are just copying the value, you can see. Here you need to also make sure that uh, you need to assign the size of a dynamic array. Without the size, you can't do this. You can't store any element. And here, in order to make sure that what is the value of size, you have the value of count. You can use that because the count would be storing the number of, you can say, number of entries in your expected output. So the output, let's say if the count is 2, then which means that the output should only be of 2 elements. So instead of hard coding 2, I will just put here the count. So depending upon the value of count, it will allocate the memories to this duplicate variable. And let's say if we try to simulate this code, all right, see, all the task is passed. And if you see in the log, right, if you have this test case and we got 5-2, you have this test case, we got 1-3, you had this test case, there's no other thing common, so you got 0. This test case, you got 7. So I think that's all from this video, guys. I hope you learned something on find duplicate array, how you can like capture the duplicate element in an array, and it will be useful definitely in your interviews. All right, see you next problem.